Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The People's Basics. I am John Munitz. We are here to do another breakdown of the mayoral campaigns in New York City in 2021. We had started our first part off yesterday for Shaun Donovan, but he has a very extensive policy platform. So we're heading straight into part two now of our policy breakdown of Shaun Donovan. Please let me know if you have any questions along the way. We'll be addressing them in between any policy sections. We expect that this is going to be a breakdown that's going to take an additional two parts after this too, because he has a lot to cover. So let's get into it. So we did education yesterday. We're on to climate. So we are going to his climate page first. Okay. So we're going to try and do a little bit of a faster breakdown than we did the last time and not just reading it all. We're going to try and get you the top line summary. So, he's giving a real call to action of why we need to move to the green economy. He calls himself a visionary who understands the climate emergency, but will also act. What does that mean? I guess it's like not just someone who is going to do the the doomsayer-ness of like talking about climate change and talking about the issue, but like someone who's actually taking the action now to realize that agenda. So then, focusing on implementation and the recovery from natural disasters like Hurricane Sandy, how this has been falling on primarily underserved communities, and how this is having adverse health effects, and how he had a legacy with former Mayor Bloomberg that they're going to try and bring them back to the global stage on trying to address climate change with a path to net zero emissions by 2050. Target scientists say we cannot miss, that's basically what he's saying. He laid out his vision about how it is unequal to the communities based off of race as well as class, that we need to be addressing this now, that this can create good jobs, that this helps prepare us against potentially more volatile weather events, and that we have an agenda to try and get this done by 2050 and leading the way on climate change as an example, frankly, for like the whole rest of the world. So he has a lot of the different parts here. So we're going to just focus on the top headline part here for now. So he wants to center on environmental justice. He wants to alleviate the public health disparities, both things we were talking about before. He wants to establish permanent and equitable public space. He wants to build a green economy that's for everyone. So, making sure that it's not just going to the same people in the inequitable system. Like a lot of the oil companies are now trying to invest in the green economy. I wonder if he has anything to encourage maybe more localized and small businesses getting support. Next, taking a real step to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yep, that's, the main target goal for a lot of climate change stuff is just reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You got to do that, plus cleaning up the pollution and just sustainable living in general. And then empowering and preparing the next generation. I assume that's like the jobs programs, is my imagination where it goes there. Then climate resiliency, making sure that our shorelines are being properly protected, and then eliminating waste. So he says here, environmental justice, in order to reinforce and elevate this work, 100 days of taking office, he'll issue an all-government environmental justice executive order. Okay, so that's probably just going to be like it has to address all the things. Let's see. Doing the skim, we can see that he wants to make sure that everything is included as like a one holistic initiative to get everything done by 2050, and that they have the authority to try and make other departments fall in line to be able to reach that goal. And likewise, similarly for pollution in general as well. Okay, so what else do they want to do? Empower neighborhoods. They want to have a reimagining of their communities and hold government accountable. So they want to expand the use of physical and social vulnerability screening and mapping to better identify these environmental justice communities, neighborhoods that have historically and are presently bearing the brunt of climate change and its contributing pollutants, taking lessons learned from California's Cal EnviroScreen, working with the Biden administration as they improve the EPA's EJ screen, and making sure these tools are complementary to those being developed by New York State as they implement the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Okay, great. So this is basically making sure that we have the data to make sure that we have information of where, frankly, pollutants are going. That's a great policy to have the data to know where we need to be addressing. Then having the scorecard, which is basically the metrics that people are going to be administering. So the first one is like, how do we know how to get these metrics? We got to be able to analyze the different communities and have a reporting system. And then you have to have a reporting scorecard so that there's visibility into metrics for the public to see how we're doing progress wise. So, I mean, both of those make sense to me as a generally complementary pair of policies. Next, reviewing existing policies and making sure that it covers any blind spots for low income and historically disadvantaged communities. Again, this is kind of general, but it's just keeping in mind that environmental justice mindset. Listen to and partner as equal collaborators with local residents to identify environmental priorities in those communities and offer resources and the power of city government. I mean, this is just being responsive. This is, again, nothing tangible. It's just like, hey, we're here to listen. Hold Albany accountable. Yeah, again, this doesn't do all that much. It's just, again, it's like a lot of these things are priorities, and it's like, it's nice to say, but they're not follow through. It's not like a new proposal, really. It's just saying like, hey, we're going to do things right and help people, and we're going to try and have this in mind when we're making decisions. But it's not like something that's being committed to, like this next thing. So this is like, they want to turn Rikers Island into the physical manifestation of environmental justice. So this is basically, they really want to use this as a place to do like wastewater treatment, clean water, composting, even new public space, all these different things that can be used for the space after they shut down the jails there. I think that makes a lot of sense if that jail does get shut down, which a lot of people are advocating for, and I think makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it would be great to use that as an area to manifest a lot of our manufacturing of maybe new energy or even just treatment facilities like you had here. So I like that, but I mean, again, this could have been a little bit more detailed. Like, again, it sounds like it's kind of just like, let's dedicate the space to that. It's not a plan. It's almost like a resolution to use the space for that purpose. Next, alleviating public health disparities. Yep, this is just, again, setting the initiative that we have to address this as something. Okay, so here's an actual proposal. Reducing air pollution from peaker plants. He wants to work with and support local community-based organizations and elected officials for the expedited closure of all peaker plants currently located in all 5 boroughs. For people who don't know what a peaker plant is, it's basically like an emergency supply energy source that the city can use sometimes, usually generated from fossil fuel sources. So if you're looking to move to full green energy, these peaker plants are fossil fuel sources, so they'd be looking to try and close these down over time. So it's also, yeah, as they elaborate here, it's natural gas for the New York peaker plants. So yeah, they're going to be looking to close those down, and they're introducing new regulations for permitting in general for natural gas. Okay, so this is basically saying like, hey, we want to phase these out over time and work with the communities to do that, to make sure that their energy needs are properly being prepared for emergencies. Like, we don't want to have what happened to Texas happen to New York City, and we don't have any fossil fuel to support us, but we want to phase them out over time, and have sufficient energy capacity and storage to be able to withstand any potential excess capacity demand. But yeah, and then on top of that, they do the regulation to make sure that in the interim, while we still need this, we need to have new regulations to make sure that it's still being done in a safe manner. Next, oh, I like this. This is something that Yang had on his platform as well. trying to make sure that the summer heat isn't too bad for certain people as we get into increasingly hotter weather due to climate change, and urban jungles frankly absorb a lot of that heat, so it can get real hot. And for those of you who do not live in the area, uh, not a lot of apartments necessarily have AC units too. So this can be a real problem for a lot of people because it's a very humid area too, being that we're right by the water. So yeah, let's go through some of these things for mitigating heat. So he wants to expand the New York City's current cool roofs program, which coats building rooftops with light colored and reflective materials. Yang had that one as well. He wants to work with the Department of Parks, Transportation, and other land use agencies to increase green space, green infrastructure, and cool roads, and make a joint effort to reduce the urban heat island effect. More of our equitable public space policies are detailed below. Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of where you would rather have the heat absorption is going to be in green areas. That's where you're hoping that this ends up getting absorbed. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And then finally, subsidizing air conditioners to prevent heat related illness. This is great. Yeah, I would love to know more about like what are you specifically doing and who you targeting and all that. But like, yeah, I mean, something we should do is get air conditioning to all these people because it is unbearable in the city, and people are increasing their electricity bills, frankly, from taking this approach of, let's go get a bunch of different fans together in here. Sometimes they'll finally commit to the what do you call it, the AC units, but yeah, I mean, it would be helpful for especially poor tenants to do that. A lot of people feel like since New York City is like a lot of the times people might live there temporarily. Like units are owned by landlords, and so the landlord isn't making that investment, and some tenants might not be thinking about making investments themselves into the unit because they might be thinking, oh, I'll move somewhere else into the city at some point, or maybe I'll move back somewhere else. I don't expect to live here forever. Maybe one day I plan to move to the suburbs or the country, or maybe even another city for work. You never know. So a lot of people are making those investments. Next, that public space he was talking about. So he wants to make sure that there are more long-term, basically open streets and more green areas in general. That these things are going to help improve health and safety, and just generally do an improvement of quality of life, be a heat absorption place. So he wants to make some of the open street policies that already exist from reduced traffic demand right now into permanent moves. More than 80%. Yeah, I mean, streets and sideways are most of the space. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that statistic of more than 80% is constituted by those two. It would be nice if we had more green space, obviously. But yeah, that's what urban density does to you. So what are they going to do? They'll develop interim use projects and pilot programs to allow communities to visualize and actively participate in changes that take shape in their neighborhood before they become long term. This also ensures that a space is not left unusable or empty during maintenance periods. Okay, so to me, this is part of just like comprehensive public planning and visualization, maybe probably of the tools of how they use public space. So no problems with that. Um, Additionally, we will look to make quick fixes such as signage improvements, providing valuable changes alongside more extensive upgrades. We'll develop outdoor toolkits and other resources to assist the service industry to create a more sustainable and long-term development of open streets. I mean, yeah, these are, again, like the small things, as he kind of emphasized. They're going to be doing the things like signage, which is just like, like making sure that everything's run smoothly when you're making an open street policy so people aren't going down the wrong ways. I mean, this is just communication plan. Let me keep going on. Establish a youth horticulture corps inspired by the Civilian Conservation Corps that will maintain public spaces while serving as a job creation and education program for young people. This core will be inspired by the New Deal and may also be revived by the incoming Biden administration. We will look to partner with them or stand up New York City's own program. That's very interesting. I hope it goes beyond just, it says public spaces, not just public parks. Because, that's a great job program. It's just a nice way to get experience coming out of college or coming out of high school, wherever you might find your educational journey ending, or not ending. Where you just want to start gaining some work experience to supplement that education. This would really help, and it's on preserving the public spaces. You need someone to do it. Like, if you want to have people use the public spaces, they have to be maintained at a certain quality. So you should invest in them. Obviously, everything becomes a budgeting question. It's like, how much do you put into this compared to something else? Where does that budget come from? That always comes into play, but it's a good idea. They'll also partner with New York City Public Schools to extend outdoor learning opportunities. Oh, that'd be so wonderful. We got to do that because we live out in the suburbs. We had the space to be able to do that. But yeah, I'd imagine a lot of students would love that experience. We loved that always when we were in our high school experience and had that opportunity. So I'd imagine similarly, it'd be beneficial for more people, especially if while they're trying to do that transition and making sure everyone has AC and is cooled down, those indoor spaces in schools too can be very hot. So let's see, next one. Yeah, this is the same thing about the open streets. Restructuring funding to ensure equitable quality, maintenance, and access to open spaces. Okay. Decentralizing private funding pools by distributing funds raised through parks, conservancies, and foundations while prioritizing environmental justice communities first. Interesting. So basically, to make sure that it's not just one centralized budget, there'd be like an automatic distribution to the different boroughs, different public areas, and then they can make programs from there of how things get used. And then the funds would be distributed with some environmental justice in mind, but that it wouldn't be program designed from the top line executive branch, but within each community's function. Yeah, so then prioritizing funding for neighborhoods and spaces that have less. They want to make sure there's equity in this process. Have stewards, so he wants to set leadership for this and use private partnerships. Okay, so fine. I'm trying to look for the unique parts here. Some of this has been very interesting, though, that he has here. And as we can always see, as we knew from the other day, he has some of the longest policy platforms, as we see in detail. Okay, so he wants to say, yeah, he already did the climate core. He talked about that as a program. Conduct a full audit on jobs required by the compliance law to make sure that these are good jobs and have the proper training programs. Okay. Building on the successful progress to increase the minimum wage. They'll be looking to establish a wage board to set fair terms for compensation for climate adaptation workers, integrating rates of pay, work rules, and scope regarding private and public projects. We must make sure that our clean economy are well-paying, adding an eye towards keeping costs down. So this is, again, it's just like parts of the process of almost establishing like a local kind of semi-jobs guarantee in a way. So, I like the idea. It's better, frankly, in my opinion, when these things are run locally, because then you run into way less procurement issues from like a federal to local level or a federal to state to local level. You just have a state running it themselves, and they have to manage their own budget of what pay rates they can afford and how many jobs they can guarantee for what types of people. So this is getting closer to that. It's obviously still a jobs program instead of a jobs guarantee, but they're clearly trying to make it more and more accessible to anyone who wants it. Clean power, job accelerator, sure. Taking real steps. Okay, so the city must focus on policy implementation to reach the current greenhouse gas mitigation goal of 40%. This is a timeline so 40% reduction by 2030 and an 80% reduction by 2050, as well as achieving net zero emissions by 2050. We will rigorously and transparently track progress towards this goal and further make up for lost ground with even deeper reductions. I'm pretty sure that goal is a little bit short, frankly. Like, that feels like a little bit of a conservative timeline. Like, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be achieving most of those goals by 2035, if not 2040, of being net zero. So it's a little off, in my opinion. It's a little conservative, but I mean, just laying out the timeline here. Okay, buildings. To get there, work with building experts. They're going to make sure that they can have more efficient buildings, making sure that building code is updated. Lead by example, doing it in our public housing. Yeah, that makes sense. Incentivizing efficiency for smaller buildings. Okay, collaborating with industry leaders to accommodate energy storage. Okay, and then supporting stronger building code to invest in, again, energy storage. Okay, so nothing there that seems out of the ordinary or particularly unique. It's just, it's updating our infrastructure to make sure that it's keeping people healthy and being done safely. Transportation. Okay, they want to expand bike infrastructure, expand bus service. Okay. They want to increase the availability of electric vehicle charging stations. I mean, like, I know sometimes it sounds like I'm disappointed in, like, when I say, oh, this is just all standard. I mean, it's because a lot of the solutions in politics are like known. It's just like he does a good job of having like all the details here. So I do give him credit for having it there. It's like you kind of need the standards before you innovate on top of that. And he definitely has the standards in plenty. Obviously, as I said before, sometimes it's like, yeah, this might be a little bit more conservative than I'd like. And a lot of these sometimes are generalities. So it's like, sometimes it's like, that's the problem with politics. All you can get is like boilerplate. Because, like, what are you expecting? To have an hour-long conversation with them on each one of these details? No, like, maybe I would love to have that and really fully understand their plan. But just the idea that they have it semi-captured here is a good thing. Next one is empowering the next generation. So this is about schooling. This is about improving K-12 education to include instruction about the climate crisis and making sure people know about it. Expand community-based sustainability projects. So that might use school kids to help out and volunteer in those projects. Incentivize partnerships among community environmental scientist groups. Okay. Establish New York City's K-12 teachers as climate ambassadors. Okay, sure. Institute rigorous high school coursework, internship experience, and certification programs in partnership with relevant industries, nonprofits, and CBO. Like, I mean, a lot of this is good. Like, I'll admit that, but it's like it's so vague. Like, let's see. Establish a larger cohort of new focused high schools, building off the model of energy tech. So that's a little bit more unique. So that's like he wants to build specific like magnet high schools in a way that are focused on developing energy technology, which is really cool. I like that idea. I think there should be more specialized high schools. Like, why are we constantly waiting until like college to be the first place where our kids start to specialize? I think a lot more people should take advantage, and we should be building more specialized high schools. So people who want to do vocational skills can start then. People who want to go into all different sorts of crafts can start getting these experiences and having these public-private partnerships to provide them jobs and real work experience for potentially future careers, so that they can learn, like, later on, or actually earlier on, that frankly, sometimes things seem good in the theoretical and enjoyable to do as a career, but until you actually do it in practice, you don't know if you really want to do that. You don't know what it's like day to day, and the only way you find out is by starting to do it day to day. So I think that's a great idea, to have these more targeted, specialized schools. Form a CUNY Opportunity Lab task force with faculty and key outside partners to identify and rapidly develop new short-term credentials and newer modified degree programs with a required work-based learning component to prepare for a range of environmental sustainability occupations. Okay, so this is basically they want to get this thing like up and running quickly. So like let's create a short-term way of credentialing people to be qualified in these areas. And let's use the existing CUNY Opportunity Lab Task Force to facilitate that. That seems fine to me. You want to get this thing moving quickly. Obviously, it matters a lot about like what are those short-term credentialing requirements, but I'm not going to get to see that here, so I'm not going to bother on that. Next, expand the model provided by the Science and Resilience Institute at Jamaica Bay, housed at Brooklyn College. Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is, again, just expanding existing models that are kind of like that specialized school model. And this is on, again, resiliency, which is very needed, especially for New York City, which is coastal. Okay, next, strengthening climate resiliency. Oh, we just get into it. So develop a dynamic, comprehensive plan. Sure. Expand the use of physical and social vulnerability mapping. Again, sure, data. Rethink traditionally used cost-benefit analysis to prioritize investment in historically disadvantaged communities and those most at risk for climate change. Okay, we will also take into account the long-term benefits and cost savings associated with resilience and risk reduction, which are often left out of this analysis. Okay. So this is basically to make sure that we don't just keep funneling money into protecting wealthier neighborhoods because we have more to lose. Like we should have some justice in this process so we stop like constantly not being able to use these areas as effectively and they keep running into, frankly, historic problems because, well, they get ravaged by natural disasters whenever they come and we don't protect those areas. So I can understand that. I would need to see it in practice of what that specifically means, but it's an interesting priority. Next, evaluate city investments through a resilience lens and ensure that city officials working on climate resilience have the operational, budgetary, decision-making. This is just like, think with this thought. I mean, that it says like very little in my mind. Establish resilient commission. Okay, it's an advisory group thinking about it. Like, yeah, it's nice to have people who are thinking about the idea, but I don't know. There's not a lot of specifics, but it's just, yeah, I mean, having people who actually are supposed to think about the idea of resilience is a good thing. I'm surprised he hasn't said anything like, oh, let's have a deputy mayor on this to make sure that things are being built resiliently. I guess this council will do that job instead. Conduct a comprehensive assessment to respond to these things. Okay. Again, just develop a plan. Like a response. Okay. Protect public housing. So, so by taking necessary and important measures for resilience, you kind of already said that, which will create jobs. Okay. I mean, again, some of this stuff feels like it's a little redundant. It's like mentioning of other parts of the plan. I mean, to be fair, it's not super redundant, like in the sense that I would recommend candidates do that because people are just going to forget some of your policy at times. So you should just remind them when you can. But yeah, like for us who are just going through this in depth, we can see how redundant it is at times. Meaningful progress to the zero waste goal. So they want to get curbside organics program, which the de Blasio administration suspended. Organics like food scraps and yard waste make up 1/3 of the city's waste stream and present profitable opportunities to convert trash into compost and clean energy. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of efficiency. I don't know why we would want to curb that stuff. I mean, obviously collection can be potentially a hassle, and there's a reason we are in a budgetary crisis that things start getting cut, but yeah, I'd love to see that program come back. Enhance recycling education programs within New York City schools and support the development of related curriculum By doing so, we can help our children form strong recycling habits. Sure. This kind of goes with the education programs they were talking about beforehand anyway. Improve waste in public housing. Sure. So they want to do more recycling within public housing by increasing the amount of recycling bins. Sure. Fine with that. Happy with that. Introduce recycling requirements for construction and demolition materials, which account for nearly half of all waste generated in the city. By working with city council and local businesses, we can advance the city's earlier unfulfilled promises to tackle this important source of waste. Now, this is the one I like. This is starting to say, like, hey, on a corporate level, like, you got to start using materials that are of the right, like, caliber, that are recyclable when you're doing your forms of construction, or at least half, as they say here. I think that is a great way of making sure we start to reduce our amount of waste, because most of it is coming from corporations, not from personal use. Yes, we should all be doing our part. We all need to learn how we can do our part and have the tools like the recycling bins to do our part. But let's be frank, most of the effort that needs to be done is reforming businesses. Next, they say reduce single-use plastic by requiring restaurants and food vendors to offer plastic utensils to takeout customers only when specially requested. This policy, which recognizes that many New Yorkers who order delivery already have utensils at home, aims to cut back on unnecessary waste and to serve as a model for other cities. Yeah, I mean, this just makes sense. I get it might feel inconvenient for some people. Like, you just want to have it included. You don't want to have to remember to ask every time. But, like, yeah, like, we should have a model where, frankly, it should be inconvenient to use plastic. If you have silverware, you should be using that and washing that, because they're reusable and are not going to go in a dump afterwards. So I think this is like one of those ways where it's like, it's not a straight up ban, you can't have it. Like, some people do need plastic utensils. I know particularly when I had talked about this in the past, I've had people in the disability community raise concerns with me about doing away with plastic altogether, because they often need it as like for straws per se. But I think in those cases, you should have those groups of people who know they have the need for that to ask for it, and the general population should just be not getting it unless they say, oh, I don't have any utensils, I actually need something right now, can you please give me one? Then in that case, yeah, you should still provide that to them. We shouldn't be just completely inconveniencing people, in my opinion. But this is a good way to do that. So we're done with his climate page. So everyone, I'm going to now check our comment section and see how y'all are doing. I love to see y'all. I love to see the people coming in just to say hi, even if you don't have your questions. So I always like to shout out the people who are coming in. So the want to see more, glad to see you here. And everyone else, we're going to be doing our housing policy breakdown. I expect there's going to be a lot that we saw from, frankly, the climate page in the housing page. And let me know if you have any questions. We're going to be wrapping up after the housing page, though. We don't want these things to become too long. But we expect to do this over 4 parts. So Monday, we'll be back at it, reviewing more of Shaun's platform, because I want to give each of the candidates a full looking at their platforms, at least the major candidates. So next, housing. Okay, so all hands on deck to provide safe, affordable, and equitable housing. So, I mean, we should all expect that this page is going to be robust. I mean, Shaun was Barack Obama's Secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. So we should expect a lot here on housing from our former HUD director. So what does his plan focus on? He wants to keep New Yorkers safe and secure in their homes and communities. He wants to invest in and preserve the public housing units. He wants to expand housing choice for all New Yorkers. He wants to address homelessness through housing. He wants to reform land use policy to be more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable. He wants to produce more housing affordability and equitability across all 5 boroughs. And he wants to invest in improved data and analysis. So, starting off in my look through this, it really seems like there's only going to be a couple that are going to be like specifically intriguing, in my opinion. Like, what does that specifically end up meaning? Like, what does housing choice mean? Like, making sure that, does this equitable versus inclusive? Like, that can mean like being very anti gentrification, making kind of like that equitable argument, but inclusive doesn't actually usually mean like opposing like a gentrification. So let's go through it. Let's just look through the different sections. We'll start off with the safety. So what does he want to do? I'm assuming, to my mind, that this is just trying to keep people in their homes, not being evicted. And that, frankly, that this is also about maybe making our NYCHA housing a little bit more safe. And frankly, also the transition housing units too. So people aren't as afraid to go to the shelters. Okay, so rental assistance, that's to help keep people in their homes. That's great. Oh, okay, that's another form of safety, addressing domestic violence by creating a flexible fund for domestic violence survivors. Love that. They do need a lot of help. And in those time periods, it's like you need ways to be able to escape, because you usually share a place, and so you need to help get people into transition housing and have all the things that help get their lives back on track. Like, we shouldn't be having the victims fall into despair when they're just trying to get away from an abuser who they thought was supposed to love them. Next, protect tenants from harassment and eviction. Yep. Okay, so this is ensuring citywide expansion of New York City's universal access to counsel program. So everyone gets a lawyer when they're facing potentially an eviction case. That's very big. Not everyone knows how to fight that on their own. And it's good to have that form of representation. Expand the capacity of legitimate foreclosure assistance organizations. Okay. Develop flexible mortgage assistance programs for those that are hardest hit. Like, so including principal reduction, down payment assistance, mortgage payment. There's a bunch of different refinancing tools, basically. They'll see what people best qualify for, I guess. They'll develop a home repair program for seniors. I guess that makes sense, because they are maybe the least capable of actually being able to do the servicing for those areas, and they might have had the units for a significantly long period of time. So yeah, that makes sense to me. Establishing flexible funds for acquisition of distressed single-family homes. So, okay, so this is basically when homes are being potentially like abandoned, they have like a fund, which is kind of like a community land trust, but oh well, no, he says he's gonna try and leverage private capital, so I shouldn't give him that credit of the competition. But they're going to try and create a fund, I guess, like as a private partnership with the government to keep families in their home and stabilize these units. That could go a lot of different ways, in my opinion. It's kind of vague. It's like I don't know exactly where he would be going with that. Like, what does the stabilization process do? I'm assuming it's keeping people at home from all these other things, but I'm just not sure. Yeah, so now they're basically saying, like, make sure that everyone knows at the 311 if people are just looking for information, to be able to provide housing assistance information. More proactive and collaborative code enforcement, making sure these things are happening in advance, sure, before problems are happening. Provide technical and financial assistance, so you're not just getting fined out the wazoo as a landlord. So this is more for them. Revamping the multifamily housing rehabilitation loan program. Incentives will help responsible building owners improve their buildings and meet climate goals. Additionally, will expand the NYC energy efficiency. Yeah, I mean, so we had this from the previous section. So this is basically just an incentive program for people to retrofit their homes and make them more efficient. Um, Step up enforcement of annual required rental building registration. Okay. So that's, again, all these standards to make sure that our housing is more efficient doesn't work unless you actually try and enforce it. So that's just increasing the budget for that. Next, they're going to be establishing a trust so that they don't keep running out of money, frankly, for all these plans. Let's see, a key element would be both the NYCHA blueprint and United for Housing's plan. This new nonprofit entity would meaningfully engage residents in oversight, provide the means to leverage multiple funding sources, access tenant protection vouchers, and ensure that we can make repairs to every apartment. Yeah, I mean, this is just establishing a trust so that they can fund what they need in the future. Um, it's interesting that it's not just like a full-on public bank to try and do these efforts, but that's okay. This is, I guess, trying to really carve out something specifically just for housing instead of a general public bank use as well. Okay, so next, make a historic investment in NYCHA up to $2 billion per year. I think that's more than I remember seeing as a commitment from like Stringer when they gave a specific dollar number. I think it's also less than we saw from Yang. I think Yang was what, 48 over 20, which I think is 2.4. Let me see if I'm doing that right. So 48 over 20. Doing the quick math. Yeah, it was 2.4. So yeah, a little bit less than Yang's, but I think this is a generally a good amount to commit in that 2 billion type of range. Okay, so commit to reducing operating costs. Okay, again, just efficiency, overhaul the governance structure. It should be led by an expanded board of directors that includes tenant representatives and people with expertise in the field, such as property management, housing finance, and social service. Oh, so this is good. So it's just making sure that you have on the board people of different backgrounds who should be in the room in trying to make these decisions rather than just being all of one type of individual, often developers. So that's or well, not just developers, but a lot of developers. In order to drive efficiencies and address the emerging needs of NYCHA's residents, a neighborhood-based management structure and development-based budget system will be created. What is so this is just giving them more control over their own budgets to run their own buildings and such. Okay. So this is, again, Shaun very much clearly likes the idea of a little bit more decentralization, which is good. Developing a clear and consistent federal advocacy strategy. Okay, so that's fine. So they're going to try and figure out how to get money out of the federal government, which we would like because we're running a deficit and we have a lot of repairs we got to make. Okay. Oh, that's nice. They're going to launch a down payment assistance program so people can get homes. The program will be targeted to formerly redlined areas so that those areas that could not get the homes start to be able to get them. And it'll offer low and zero interest loans for up to 5% of the home's value for low and moderate income families. That's nice. The loans will be zero interest and forgivable if the buyer remains in the home for a period of 10 years. Oh, okay. That is nice. So it's basically incentivizing people to actually stay in the area. It's going to have most of this be forgiven. We just want to make sure that you can start making your payments and that you're not just a flight risk. I think that's a wonderful program to help people be able to start being able to get homes. God forbid, like, I mean, so many people in my generation think it's just an impossibility. So, I mean, you can help people do that. I don't know if there's like a lot of space for homes specifically in New York City. Like there isn't that many. Like I think it's around 61% of units are rented. Um, but I mean, it's nice in theory. It's just one of those things where it's like I'm not sure if New York City is specifically the place like for that. Um, but I digress. It's still good in theory. Okay, so now they're going to capitalize on community land trusts. That's nice. So they're going to try and provide more assistance to those. Create a security deposit guarantee program. Oh, yo, that's awesome. So this would basically say like, hey, okay, so let's read this part right here. Another key step. Oh no, that's a different part. So what would be? Would it just be in poor areas? Like, why not do that like universally? I mean, like, why is it just like for poor people in rich areas? Like, why can't that just be a program across the board? I don't know. It feels like a weird restriction. I like the idea. I really hope he would expand that because I mean, a lot of us worry about like, can we get our money back when we put in the deposit? Like, obviously, there should be some level of being able to take some money from the security deposit if you do break some stuff or seriously dirty an area and do not clean it before you depart. Um, but yes, sometimes you need a form of accountability because you don't have a lot of recourse as a renter. And so having a group to kind of secure it and maybe even be able to file complaints to would be nice. Um, let's see. Next, he says he wants to establish an equity bonds proposal where each child in New York City would receive $1,000 deposited into a city administered savings account with up to $2,000 added for each subsequent year of completed public schooling. Oh wow! So like, I mean, that should be a much larger plan. So he wants to do baby bonds. Shaun Donovan is a backer of the baby bonds proposal. Um, and it's basically, interestingly enough, he puts an incentive tied to it that you got to go to public school, which is real interesting to me. I like it because it's a natural incentive to try and get more people into the public system, which I think is beneficial. So that more people get a wider range of socialization, and you generally improve the quality of the schools because you can get more funding into the schools. Um, but yeah, it's gonna maybe cause a little polarization there from people who don't go to those schools. But I like it myself. I am a fan of that. So next, support local legislation to address discrimination based on past involvement with the criminal justice system. Yeah, this is again, like, it's not just like there's so many things where they say like you got the box to check off. And housing is one of those. And frankly, if you've served your time in prison, you should be treated like anyone else in society. You've served your time. And so, in my opinion, you should be able to get housing guaranteed like any other person in our city, state, country, what have you. So, yes, I agree. We need to do stuff to be able to help address that and help reintegrate them into society because a lot of the times they end up in the shelters and a lot of them mean to do good and want to get back up on their feet, but they feel unsafe in those environments. They then struggle to find like a stable footing to be able to get gainful employment and they kind of get trapped back out on the streets, and that can lead to crimes of despair sometimes or just a deterioration of mental health from lack of food, lack of sleep, what have you. So I fully agree we need to do something to help get people who are former criminals into housing, so that we end this cycle of recidivism, because it shouldn't be that our housing guarantee for former criminals is go commit another crime and we'll go give you shelter. Next one. Identify and encourage the use of alternative and less exclusionary tenant screening practices. Um, okay, kind of vague, but okay, sure. Less discrimination in housing. Expand the use of paired testing to enforce the strong, fair housing protections we already have enshrined in place. Paired testing, in which multiple applicants who are similar except for a relevant characteristic apply for the same housing, is one of the most effective tools we have to root out discrimination. Yeah, I agree. These kind of feel like they're coming together. It's like, well, how do you find out who's doing the discrimination in practice? You got to test the people who are doing the screening, and then also like, how do you fix the screening process? You got to make it less exclusionary so these people can't as easily discriminate, even if they have the will to discriminate, or not even the will, the subconscious will to discriminate. Okay, next, he will advocate for universal vouchers at the federal level, coupled with a city level shift from funding shelters to providing rental assistance for lower income households. Interesting. So I'm wondering if the universal vouchers is to like an individual level. I mean, it does sound like that he wants to move from the shelter model to like being able to make sure that there is housing of any kind, like with a choice, like you have a voucher to use on some housing if you are poor potentially. I generally am supportive of the idea, but so much of this matters on structure, and I'd love to see more specifically on this because this could be a very big policy, frankly. But I mean, again, maybe he didn't flesh it out because, as he said, he's going to advocate for these things and push it from the federal level. So he has no idea how it would come to him once they make the sausage. So yeah, I guess it makes sense that he kept it a little vague. Next, they'll enforce the city source of income discrimination laws and break down barriers. Again, just another anti-discrimination measure. And then they'll do support housing navigators, train professionals who can provide information about neighborhoods around the city as well as the process of obtaining housing. Interesting. I don't know a ton about those people, but I mean, we should have social workers that can help people get connected to housing opportunities for sure. I don't know if they're just like tour guides, like out and about, like giving information out, or if they're people who are like working, like in scouting the area, looking for people to try and connect to housing. I'd like to know more about the program. I like the potential of what that could be, like in trying to have people go out in the streets and get people who are currently homeless connected to the proper services to get themselves housed and back on track. Okay, next one, create a new flexible rental assistance program. And they would commit a certain amount, like 330 million, to reducing reliance on shelter and just rental assistance in general, with an additional 500 million coming hopefully from the states and $1 billion from the federal government. Sounds great. Let's see if he can secure that. Because again, a lot of people need rental assistance because they have not been able to be employed because of restrictions from the government and from the pandemic. And so they still have these bills. And what do you expect them to do? Just like go out on the street? And right now we say like, yeah, no, you can't evict them. But eventually that eviction moratorium is going to wear off. And people are going to get kicked out on the street unless they get some rental assistance. Next, they want to do a client-focused process of placement. Okay, so this is not just like having the administration like straight up put you in a home, but like have some level of guidance from the people. I mean, I need more details. It just seems like very vague, but I mean, it's a nice thought. Like, you should want to live in your unit. That way you'll probably more likely treat it well long term, frankly. But I don't know enough about what that meant, frankly. Like, it was very vague. What could this be? I mean, it's obviously building upon this coordinated assessment and placement model, which I'll be frank, I don't know enough about that specific model. But again, it doesn't say a lot. I mean, managing housing placement across the yeah, it really doesn't say all that much about like what specific changes he wants to do on building on top of it. Just like Yeah, make it more client focused. Then they want to create more permanent supportive housing units, creating 2,000 units. So supportive housing is just, it's not just saying, hey, um, here's a permanent home. It's saying here's a home along with services because you might have disabilities or you might be elderly, which again is kind of like you have disabilities. Um, and so we're trying to support those people. Um, so that's what that really means. And I think that makes sense. You need to have targeted shelter for some types of individuals. Again, similarly, because of that same type of thing, start doing models of shelter that have very easy access, like in like safe havens and stabilization beds, so that you recognize the particular types of people who are out on the streets, which is often the disability community. Okay. Oh, there it is. I was talking about this beforehand. How I was surprised I didn't. He had this committee. Where is the deputy mayor for it? And so he's got his deputy mayor position. Um, Everyone loves to create more admin in government. I get it. Like it's like creating your own cabinet, but like they just keep creating new and new positions that have like deputy mayor in it. It's like maybe you should have an advisory council and make your own decisions. Like I like the first one. It's like, do you need the deputy mayor though? Maybe, maybe. I would just again, it's all about budget to me. It's like where is the fat being cut? Because like a lot of what you see on every one of these people's platforms, a lot of the times, is you get to see the new spending, but you rarely get to see how you actually pay for it. And I'm less of a stickler on those things, especially on a national level. But on the local matters, these things matter, especially when our current city has easily a $5 billion deficit. In 2017, they'll partner with the state and city corrections to ensure housing placement. Yeah, I mean, I talked about that before. Okay, again, making targeted efforts for specific groups like those that are pregnant and connecting them with other supportive services. Like a lot of these feel like it's like you take an idea and now you're kind of just like writing it out for like each use case example, just so that you kind of like have covered it. You've talked about that group. Because I mean, like a lot of this is just, again, the supportive housing model that they've been trying to want to develop. And that you have these services that can help connect people with not just housing, but all the additional services that they need while they're trying to get back on their feet. I think he even said this one too, the creating the domestic violence funding. Again, good. Just trying to like one of the things is his platform is so long that I don't want to like constantly have to review the same things said over and over. Okay, streamline ULERP. Yeah, I mean, what is he actually specifically wanting to do? Like, it's just saying streamline the process. It doesn't really say much. Like, how are you streamlining it? It doesn't really say. Okay, so here's an interesting one: eliminating parking requirements. So, new housing is typically required to include off-street parking spaces, even in areas where car ownership rates are low, or there is excellent access to public transit. Basically, this is saying like, hey, you don't have to build parking in your places, and this could accelerate how much affordable housing we do. And it makes sense when a lot of the people in affordable housing probably are not also then affording a car too. So I think this makes a lot of sense as a form of deregulating stuff. This is like we talk a lot about it matters what specific forms of deregulation you're trying to do. This is one that makes a lot of sense to me. Zoning to accommodate appropriate density, applying fair housing principles to New York City. He wants to make sure that there's integration. Give specific low-income areas. Wait, okay, let me read this in. So, as mayor, Shaun will apply these fair housing principles to New York City, seeking an equitable allocation of affordable units, particularly by providing new opportunities for families to live in affluent neighborhoods, which have been off limits to low-income families for too long. Rezoning efforts such as those in Soho, NoHo, and Gowanus are a good first step. The Donovan administration would seek to identify other high opportunity areas across the city where bulk and use restrictions can be modified to stimulate new affordable housing production. Okay, so I guess this is like a means of price stabilizing in a way. So, like particular communities that are expensive, frankly, and have a lot of area. There's a reason why it's expensive. There's a lot of demand there. Probably are the best places to try and put new housing because there's a lot of demand for those areas. And it'll probably make rent a lot more affordable for the people in the area too. So I like that idea. Ensure that these millions of square feet of office and hotel space can be repurposed for residential use. Yeah, this is just, again, trying to take some of the abandoned hotels from the decline in the tourism industry from the past year, buying them up and using them as temporary units and converting them long term into other forms of units. And not just, I guess, hotel space, but like office space too. I think that makes a lot of sense. Require city planning to estimate the loss of buildable square footage resulting from new district designations. Okay, so have a report, fine. Community board. President reform the appointment process, ensure the community board meetings. Okay, sure. So this is just making sure that the election process and how people get appointed to the community board is reformed. It has an impact on how zoning decisions are made. Okay, lift the cap on how much affordable is actually built in general. Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I think we're at the final part, like in equity. So he wants to adopt United for Housing's call for $4 billion a year in capital funding for affordable housing production. That's great. Involve making a historic commitment of up to $2 billion per year in city capital dollars. $2 billion annual investment would provide the resources for HPD to create new affordable housing programs, mixed housing, preserving existing affordable housing, and producing new housing. Like, none of this is too crazy here. Making sure that things talk to each other, making sure that these jobs in construction are good paying, implementing comprehensive hiring to make sure that you're hiring residents, setting a wage that's above the minimum wage. Yeah, I mean, this is just, again, just making sure that there's good jobs. It's a very thorough plan. It's like a lot of the big proposals have to be supported by these little kind of like obvious proposals, and sometimes they're redundant from things he said before, and it's just kind of reemphasizing. So that's a lot of the length of his proposals, but it clearly shows he's thought these things out. Yeah, because he just said that stuff before. Yeah, I mean, that's really all that he has in that. And then he wants to just increase the data to make sure that all the different areas are properly talking to each other, to make sure that registrations are being properly enforced. Again, it's just data. So yeah, that's Shaun Donovan's platform for housing. He's clearly thought through this a lot. And I think overall he has a really solid plan when it comes to housing as well as climate. I was thoroughly satisfied on these two. There was obviously a couple disagreements here or there, but I think it was, frankly, like, these are going to be some of the best areas of his platform, as we kind of imagined. We knew that his top priorities were going to be housing and education from his About Us page, and I think his climate page is really important because it's kind of that intersection of the two. I kind of expect transportation will be in a similar light, will be a very positive page because it's, again, very like infrastructure driven. And then we'll start to get maybe some more differences of opinion in some of the later policy platforms, like maybe in the criminal justice and economic development and innovation tabs, we might find more. But that wraps up today's episode. I want to thank those who did come in and join today's stream. We'll be back again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So again, thank you for coming to the People's Basics. We hope you have a great day, and we hope you stay basic out there.